Chapter 6. Focus. The F word of spontaneous speaking. Don't make it hard for your audiences to get your point. Focus their attention on what matters most. The best, most powerful communication in both formal and spontaneous situations is clear and sharply focused. It conveys everything an audience needs to receive the speaker's desired message, and only that information. It doesn't distract audience members, bore them, or waste their time by using verbiage that is fuzzy, irrelevant, impossibly dense, acronym-laden, or long-winded. For a classic example of a well-focused, albeit painstakingly planned message, consider how Steve Jobs first introduced Apple's revolutionary iPod to the world. The year was 2001, the occasion a press briefing held at an auditorium at the company's headquarters. Upon taking the stage, Jobs could have raved about the iPod's many features, its sleek design, its weight, the size of its screen, how much storage capacity it offered. Instead, he beguiled consumers with a focused, memorable message that in just 5 words conveyed everything they wanted and needed to know about Apple's new product. 1,000 songs in your pocket, one at a time. Many music lovers stored their music on CDs, which were cumbersome to lug around. Other MP3 players existed, but they had a limited storage capacity. The phrase 1,000 songs in your pocket, which became a tagline for Apple's advertising, accomplished several tasks at once. It evoked consumers' previous challenges in listening to music, distinguished the iPod from the competition, and conveyed the iPod's practical value for consumers, all in 5 simple words. The iPod went on to become hugely popular. It revolutionized the way we listen to music and also gave rise to the whole medium of podcasting, something for which I am very grateful. I wish more communication in everyday life were as sharply focused and meaningful as this bit of marketing magic was. How often have you chatted with someone at a cocktail party only to find yourself in the middle of an anecdote with so much backstory that you forgot why they even started telling it? How often have leaders at your company answered questions in ways that seemed confusing and vague? How often have colleagues, customer service agents, friends, or others in your life danced around an issue, making elaborate excuses to avoid responsibility, providing excessive background information to establish their authority, or chattering on simply to hear themselves speak? We don't always realize it when our messages lack focus, but others do. One leader my firm was brought in to coach, the founder of a gaming company, was fielding questions during a public presentation focused on building enthusiasm for the company's new product launch. An audience member asked a technical question about a feature that was missing from the company's products. The founder went on for 20 minutes, walking the audience through the company's thinking about this technical detail and the various ways its engineers might handle it. His answer was truthful and comprehensive, and it even followed a clear structure. Unfortunately, it conveyed information relevant to only a tiny number of people in the audience, and not the key demographic that he was trying to reach. As a result, most audience members tuned out after a few minutes. What the leader had missed in that moment was to focus on the information that the primary audience needed, and answer the question in a way that would be relevant to the majority. Had he done that, he might have realized he needed to answer the question more simply, saying something like, "Yes, that feature will be in our product's next release." We need not be communication geniuses like Steve Jobs to maintain a sharp focus, nor must we masterfully sculpt every last word in advance so that it's just right. As with structure, just a bit of practice and skills development goes a long way, empowering us to deliver more focused messages impromptu. My work with clients and students has led me to identify 4 dimensions or qualities of focused messages: precision, relevance, accessibility, and concision. Practice enhancing these qualities and you'll find yourself connecting better with audiences, engaging them longer, and delivering messages that stick better in people's minds. Dimension number 1, precision. What's the point exactly? Bottom line, have a clear goal, know, feel, do. Focused messages are nothing if not precise, tailored to have a specific effect or impact. When we're precise, we know exactly what we hope to accomplish in the course of speaking and we craft our language to achieve that end. This begs the question, what do we hope to accomplish? Many times, we have only a vague or partial sense. As a result, we struggle to determine not only what to say, but what not to say. This leads us to respond in ways that distract audiences, confuse them, or bore them to oblivion. When most people reflect on their communication goals, they consider information they wish to impart or ideas they hope to convey, in other words, their content. But what we want our audience to know is only one dimension of our goals as communicators. We must also consider what we want audiences to feel, the emotions we want them to experience. And we must consider what we want our audiences to do, the actions we want our audiences to take. A goal isn't simply our intended meaning but also the broader impact we intend that meaning to have. Clarity across all three dimensions of our communication goal can be extremely powerful. Audiences can more easily grasp our intended meaning, and we as speakers can adapt to almost any situation that might arise, even those that would ordinarily become total train wrecks. When people craft goals, they tend to ignore emotions, and they also tend to remain vague about the actions they want to see. So let's first consider emotions. As we saw in Chapter 5, stories lodge in our memories more easily and get into our brains faster than other information because they trigger emotions, becoming meaningful in ways that statistics and bullet points can't. Marketers know the power of emotion well. If they connect with consumers on the level of feelings, consumers tend to buy more and stay more attached to the brand. Leveraging Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman's work in behavioral economics, marketing professor Barbara Shiv speculates that something like 90 to 95% of our decisions and our behaviors are constantly being shaped non-consciously by our emotional brain system. One study found that customers who were fully connected to companies on an emotional level were over 50% more valuable to them in economic terms than those who just felt highly satisfied with their products. You'll notice that in this last paragraph, I didn't follow my own advice. I tried to convince you to pay closer attention to emotion when thinking about your goals as a communicator, but I did it by appealing to your rational mind, citing data points and scientific studies. Let me rectify that. Picture yourself sitting in a conference room at work. It's almost 5 o'clock on a Friday and you're eager for your weekend to start. You're in your last meeting of the day, a presentation by one of your bosses. The point of the presentation is simple. There's a big market opportunity that your team can seize, but your boss has bogged down his presentation with charts and tables. Imagine how impatient you're getting as he painstakingly explains yet another slide, and another. When someone asks a question, your boss responds impromptu with, yes, still more data points and rational arguments piled atop one another. A ball of tension forms in your stomach as you struggle to stay awake and not fidget. You find yourself asking, why do I care about this? What am I supposed to do with this information? Your boss hasn't clarified the dimension of his goals, and it is unclear what he wants anybody to do next. Did this more emotional, story-driven articulation of my argument feel more compelling to you than my earlier sentences laden with data and quotations from authority? Beyond information and emotion, we must consider action. We tend to remain fuzzy on the specific actions we wish our audiences to take as a result of our messages. I see this all the time when prepping entrepreneurs for informal question and answer sessions. Many of them know what information they wish to convey, for instance, data about the company's mission, strong past performance, and future opportunities, as well as the emotional impact, in most cases, curiosity and excitement about the firm. But they don't always make it clear what they want their audiences to do. Entrepreneurs will tell me they seek to obtain support for their ventures. What does that mean exactly? Is it financial investment? Is it getting someone to like them on social media? Is it getting audience members to become evangelists for the company? If they haven't thought this through carefully enough, they can't fine-tune what they are saying in a way that leads audience members in the desired direction. They find it harder to respond in the moment, and their impromptu messages don't hang together. To improve your ability to speak spontaneously, you would do well to first clarify your goals in your own mind. If you're about to enter a situation where you think you might speak spontaneously, spend a few minutes jotting down answers to 3 questions. What do you want people to know? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? Try it. Think back to the last time you spoke spontaneously. What did you want people to know, feel, and do? Were the messages you delivered aligned with these goals? Think about how you might measure success. Will your audience be able to understand a given set of ideas? Will you see visible signs that they feel a certain way? Will the audience give you a certain amount of money or take another action a given number of times? After speaking spontaneously, take a few minutes to evaluate how successful you were, comparing the impact you had to your previously established goals. Did you achieve your goal across all three areas? Why or why not? What might you do better next time? If you run through this exercise a few times, you'll get in the habit of entering social situations with more precise ambitions and analyzing your behavior afterward more rigorously. Dimension number 2, relevance. Why should I care? Bottom line, focus on importance and salience for your audience. Legendary entrepreneur Jim Carr, a pioneer of craft brewing and the creator of Samuel Adams' Boston Lager, knows a thing or two about selling. Early in his career, he and his business partner got their company, the Boston Beer Company, off the ground by going into neighborhood bars one at a time and making their pitch. Sometimes they succeeded, often they did not. Looking back on his career, Carr relates his belief in what he calls the golden rule of selling. Never ask customers to do something that is not in their long-term best interest. Underlying that rule, Carr suggests, is an extreme focus on the customer. Businesses should adhere to an almost Buddhist ideal of selflessness, he says. If you do that, as we did from the outset, you make life a lot easier for yourself. You build trusting, loyal relationships with people. You wind up winning financially because your customers benefit from the relationship. And perhaps most importantly, you feel good about selling because you are helping others succeed as well. To sell in a selfless way, you must first strive to understand customers and their concerns. Take time to listen carefully and understand what customers perceive their need to be, Carr counsels. Until you understand people's reasons for doing what they are doing, you have no ability to change their beliefs and behavior. You're just arguing, and you're not going to win. Carr relates the challenge he faced every time he walked into a bar on a sales call. Within 30 seconds, he had to size up the person with whom he was meeting as well as the bar and its business. Only then could he figure out how to pitch his product to them. And if he couldn't think of a way that Samuel Adams' Boston Lager could fill the bar's needs and contribute to its success, he didn't try too hard to push it. He continued on to the next bar. Try it. A famous improvisation game called Sell a Blank to a Blank asks participants to sell a random product and service to a randomly selected type of person. The product might be a plunger or piano, and the job type or person might be a police officer, circus clown, or kindergarten teacher. The person playing this game would spend a minute or two trying to sell a plunger to a police officer, for instance, or a piano to a circus clown. This game helps us to practice imagining other people and tailoring our communication to their needs. Try picking 3 products or services of your own. For each one, pick a type of person to sell to. How might you best frame your pitch? Creating common ground. The strongest, most focused messages are those that audiences perceive as relevant to their situations. They are messages that speak directly to who audiences are, what they want, and what they need, messages that somehow address the question that lingers in the mind of any of us when we're listening. Why should I care? We often go astray in spontaneous situations by failing to craft our message with audiences in mind. We assume that the people we are speaking to have a base-level interest for what we want to talk about, simply because of our own enthusiasm for the topic. We focus on what we want to say, without asking ourselves how to frame the message in a context that our audience wants or needs to hear. When we're trying to argue for an idea, we rattle off arguments that are important and impactful to us. Particularly when discussing a topic that we feel emotionally about, we may skip the step of asking what will make the same topic important, impactful, and emotionally resonant for our audience. Ditto when we're trying to sell a product or service, we list the features and functions rather than explaining how what we're selling solves an important problem or challenge as customers define it. To make your spontaneous communication more relevant, make a habit of thinking about your audiences and their needs. You can do this in the moment. If someone puts you on the spot with a question, pause for just a second and ask yourself, who is this person? What do they need to hear? How can I frame what I'm about to say so that it's most relevant, interesting, urgent for them? If you're heading into a situation where you might have to speak spontaneously, spend a little time beforehand preparing with some base-level questions. You can even perform a slightly more rigorous analysis, grounded, if possible, in some quick research. Consider the following questions. How might I best convey to this particular audience what I find most important or compelling about my topic? How much does the audience know about my topic? What impressions of me and my topic does my audience likely have? Are there any likely areas of resistance, concern, or hesitation? What motivates my audience? Let's say you're in a wedding party for a close friend who grew up on the other side of the country. You don't know your friend's family very well, and you've never met their fiancé's family. You do know that your friend comes from a community that holds traditional religious beliefs and that shows great deference to its elders. Because you're such close friends, you think it likely that someone will invite you to toast the happy couple at some point during the multi-day event. You might ponder the previous questions as you prepare to speak. The likelihood is that the audience doesn't know you, so you'll need to spend at least a little time describing who you are and what your friend means to you. You'll also need to spend a little time thinking about your audience. Perhaps you have learned that it is customary in your friend's culture to show deference to their elders, so you could consider expressing how meaningful it has been to meet your friend's parents. When you're giving a toast to a room with a range of ages and acquaintances, you should consider what kind of humor will get laughs versus what might create discomfort in the room. Think critically about how your audience might respond to anything inappropriate. Ultimately, you know that your audience is motivated by love for your friend, so you should think of a couple of endearing stories to tell that captures your own affection for them. Putting in just a few minutes of thought along these lines can pay huge dividends when you're put on the spot. You might not respond perfectly, but the messages you craft will be more meaningful and relevant and less likely to cause offense than if you hadn't considered your audience prior. Further, if you pose these questions and realize that you don't know the answers, you can take steps to gain more insight into your audience, for instance by speaking quickly with your friend and asking them about their family. Another way to find common ground with an audience and establish the relevance of your ideas is to deliberately create moments of curiosity or tension. Let's say you're on a Zoom call when your manager asks for your thoughts on how your team might update one of the company's current products. In a situation like this, you may feel put on the spot, especially if you know that some customers have provided negative feedback. But rather than hide from that reality, a situation like this could give you an opportunity. In answering your boss's query, you might spur curiosity in your boss and others on the Zoom by first identifying 3 or 4 unexpected comments you've received from customers about their experiences with your product. Hearing this feedback might trigger questions in the minds of your audience members. How did these comments originate? How might we best address them? Is there an opportunity to improve or expand? If the customer feedback you're citing was negative, bringing it up might create tension among the group. But you can transform that tension into curiosity by establishing a new, shared priority. How might we resolve this problem? Posing this question might create a sense of urgency, priming audience members to find your response to your boss's original query. How might the team update the company's current product? More relevant and interesting. Try it. In your next spontaneous encounter, try creating a moment of curiosity for your audience that might make the topic seem more relevant and urgent. If someone poses a question for you to answer on the spot, create just a bit of uncertainty by first defining a potential impact or challenge that the answer you'll give will address, and only then delivering the answer itself. If someone hasn't asked a question but you find yourself in the position of communicating an idea, evoke curiosity by first posing and answering a question of your own. For example, when you spontaneously need to share information about a new product, you could ask, do we really want to support 2 products in the market? Turning resistance into curiosity. The example above demonstrates how thinking about relevance requires that we also address potential areas of resistance that audience members might have. We can also do this by dampening the tension, moderating our words so as not to say something that we know will set off the audience. Anytime you're thinking about resistance and how to combat it, you're really thinking about defensiveness, social psychologist and Stanford GSB Professor Zachary Tormala observes. Our challenge is to help reduce that defensiveness in others. So taking a more open, agreeable, Inclusive and cooperative type approach with people generally lowers their resistance, and then you have a chance. At least there's some wiggle room. To project more openness and inclusivity, we can ask questions and try to find common ground. We might say something like, in thinking about how to achieve this goal, I am curious about your thoughts on X. Every bit of effort we take to increase relevance increases the odds that our audiences will engage with our message. The reality is that most audiences are selfish with their attention and focus. This holds even in spontaneous situations where people appear to be motivated to hear what you have to say. Interviewers are curious about your answers. Colleagues seeking feedback want to hear your thoughts. Audience members at celebrations want to hear your toast. Yet these folks still can become distracted and fail to pay attention. They'll stand a better chance of tuning in if your communication seems important to them and well tailored to their needs. Address the why should I care question in the course of communicating and you'll find that audiences really will care more about what you say, and they'll pay attention to your focused message. Dimension number 3, accessibility. Why is this stuff so complicated? Bottom line, make your content understandable by avoiding jargon and acronyms. One of the most common mistakes we make in spontaneous communication is to overcommunicate. In line with the importance of listening to the room and thinking ahead about what kind of communication our audience is ready to have, many of us could stand to make our spontaneous communication more accessible. Complexity can stand in the way of some of our most important conversations. Some of this complexity occurs because people feel the need to broadcast their status as experts. A great deal of it owes to what some have called the curse of knowledge. We know too much for our own good, and we make assumptions and use language when communicating that our audiences or frankly most ordinary mortals would find impenetrable. There is also what we might call the curse of passion. We ramble on unnecessarily, conveying everything we know about a subject, simply because we feel passionately about the topic at hand and presume our audience does, too. But complexity comes at a cost, especially in spontaneous situations. Complexity renders our messages confusing and distracting. In many cases, it can turn our audiences off by creating needless distance between ourselves and them. We're the experts, and they're just lowly, uninformed listeners. Finally, it can make our communication much longer than it should be, leading audience members to become overwhelmed or bored and tune out. When you become aware of complexity's sheer prevalence in society and our obliviousness to it, it can seem almost farcical. I got a laugh some years ago when leading a workshop for members of the U.S. military. I was explaining how detrimental complex language, jargon, and acronyms were for communicators when a military official raised his hand and said that he and his colleagues didn't have a problem with excessive jargon. I was flabbergasted, observing that in the short time I'd been with them I'd heard a whole array of acronyms whose meaning escaped me. Well, this gentleman said, we have a goat for that. I had no clue what he was talking about. A goat? You sacrifice an animal and everyone somehow understands acronyms? You write acronyms on an animal and that's how everyone learns. He explained that he was talking about a goat, not a goat. GOAT stood for Glossary of Acronyms and Terms. Apparently, all newcomers to the team I was addressing received a copy of the GOAT so that they could understand what their colleagues were talking about. Here, in other words, was a professional environment in which acronyms, jargon, and complex language were so prevalent that they had created a handbook to compile and explain it all, and even that handbook's name was an acronym. It didn't occur to them to try a different and far more elegant solution: pare back the complicated language so that both spontaneous and formal communication were more accessible. TED Talks are a standard 18 minutes long. As curator Chris Anderson has remarked, this length is short enough to hold people's attention, including on the internet, and precise enough to be taken seriously. But it's also long enough to say something that matters. 6. As it turns out, speakers really don't need a full 18 minutes. The late Hans Rosling, co-author of the book Factfulness and a well-regarded TED speaker, demonstrated in 2012 that it's possible to hold someone's attention and say something that matters in under a minute. And guess what? He did it while mostly speaking spontaneously. In a moment captured on video and billed as the shortest TED Talk ever given, Rosling identified what he felt would become a burning global issue in the years to come: the challenge posed by economic inequality coupled with population growth. He held up 7 stones, indicating that each represents 1 billion of the Earth's population, which at the time was 7 billion. He placed 1 stone on the ground. This represented the billion people affluent enough to travel abroad. He placed another stone on the ground. This represented another billion people affluent enough to secure access to a car. He placed 3 more stones on the ground, representing the 3 billion who could afford to save up for a bike or motorcycle. Then 2 more stones went onto the ground. This was the next tranche of the Earth's population that could afford to save only for a pair of shoes. With this setup in place, Rosling noted that in the years to come, the global population would become more affluent. Rearranging stones, he observed that people at the lower rungs of global society would move up. 1 billion would still be able to afford airfare, while 3 billion would afford access to a car and another 3 billion would be able to aspire to own a bike. Few would be poor enough to aspire to buy only a pair of shoes. Then he added 3 more stones to the mix, noting that the global population would one day soon rise to 10 billion, with all of the population heading up to the top 2 economic rungs. The question, he observed, in his presentation's rousing conclusion, is whether the rich people over there are prepared to be integrated with the formerly poor, in a world with 10 billion people. There it was, an important insight conveyed in mere seconds. That is the shortest TED Talk ever given, Rosling proclaimed with a smile. Rosling could have cited all kinds of facts and figures. He could have trotted out the names of famous economists and others studying the issue. He could have pointed to classic theorists of population growth. He could have made reference to obscure terms of art, such as crude birth rate or doubling time or the push-pull hypothesis. But for his audience, a general one comprised of non-specialists, all of that would have been distracting and beside the point. Rosling retained remarkable focus in the moment by keeping his remarks not only relevant but as clear and accessible as possible. We don't all have to be geniuses of clear and accessible communication. It's enough to simply take steps to improve our game. Justin Kestler, a founder of the popular literature study guide series LitCharts, who was the original editor-in-chief of SparkNotes and now also leads CliffsNotes, thinks of such products as serving not so much to pare down long, complex works of literature but rather to analyze and explain their themes so that the works can be understood and appreciated more easily by the broader public. We likewise can think of ourselves as translators whose job it is to put complex ideas into relatively straightforward terms that anyone can understand. Just a bit of attention to translation can go a long way, helping us deliver more focused messages on the spot. To reduce jargon, we might make a habit of putting ourselves in someone else's shoes just before we say something, or if we're about to enter a situation where we anticipate having to speak spontaneously, we can think about our audience and their capacity to understand. When I explain technology to members of my family, I apply what we in my family call the grandmother test. My elderly mother doesn't have much knowledge of the latest gadgets. How can I explain technology, minimizing jargon and keeping technical explanations and detail to a minimum, so she can gain a practical understanding of it? Even when I'm not speaking with my mom, I can apply the grandmother test to ensure that I'm not overwhelming my audience with unnecessary complexity, either. If you aren't sure about your audience's capacity to understand, do some quick research. The toymaker Lego is widely known for creating instruction manuals so simple and accessible that kids anywhere, including those who haven't learned to read yet, can use them to build their desired projects. Lego designer Anthony Dolby told me that the company maintains a very, very deep knowledge and understanding of what kids are able to understand at any age. It uses that knowledge to make decisions such as how many Lego bricks it shows on a page of an instruction manual or how to color the bricks. It painstakingly imparts this knowledge to employees, requiring that they undergo a full year of training before they can write building instructions. As spontaneous communicators, we cannot usually count on having this depth of understanding of our audience. But it does help to know in advance. If our audiences are familiar with certain words or concepts, how long they are liable to pay attention, how they like to receive information, and so on. If you're appearing at a professional or company function, a quick chat with the organizer or an employee at the company might be all that you need to get this information. If applicable, you might also hop online and see the kind of Language the company uses on its own website or that company leaders or representatives used at previous appearances that were recorded and posted. I recommend running a quick diagnostic of your communication on a periodic basis to ensure that you're not drowning others in acronyms and excessive details. If you've just attended a conference, cocktail party, or some other event in which you've spoken spontaneously, take a few moments to replay these conversations in your mind. Did you use any jargon? Did you take time to explain and deconstruct your ideas in the course of delivering your message? Try it. Think about the shorthand, jargon, or industry vocabulary you most often use. Over a period of a few days, notice when you use these terms, and think of more accessible synonyms you might use in conversation with others. Set yourself a jargon challenge and see whether you can go an entire day without using these terms. You might object that the nature of your work or hobbies requires you to convey complex concepts or esoteric ideas to others. What can you do then? Just as you might take time in advance to prepare a set of stories to have in your back pocket in spontaneous situations, you might also think in advance of some key strategies to deploy in the moment to cut to the essence of an idea and render it accessible. These strategies might include clever or colorful analogies you can use by way of explanation, or if you anticipate standing in front of a whiteboard, an easy visual you might draw to convey the essence of the idea. You could also chunk down your idea into a few basic, easy-to-understand concepts or steps, a strategy Kestler used in creating lit charts. By the way, this chunking approach is a neat way of helping audiences connect better with what you're saying. People who aren't especially motivated to receive a message tend to remember most of the information they hear at the start of your communication, tuning out the rest. By chunking a message, you're in effect creating multiple starting moments, enabling your audience to stay more engaged throughout and to remember more of the overall message. One especially important strategy to consider in advance is conveying the most important information up front. Journalists capture this method with the phrase, "Don't bury the lead." In other words, start an article with the big news item stated in simple form and then go on to give increasing amounts of detail. In the military, this technique is known as BLUF, yes, an acronym. I know, bottom line up front. Organizing information in this way can focus audiences quickly on the main message, saving them from having to dig through a morass of detail. Did you notice I used BLUF for each of the 4 dimensions in this chapter? Practicing the delivery of your ideas in BLUF prior to a meeting or conference can help you become much more focused when you find yourself on the spot. It can also help to ask yourself the question, what do I really want to say, when you're speaking in the moment, as this helps you to prioritize your thoughts. Dimension number 4, concision. Why are they so long-winded? Bottom line, be crisp. From her reading of parenting books, my wife learned a mantra that she reminds me of as we're working out issues with our kids: minimal words. When I ask one of our kids to do something they don't want to do, I tend to explain a rationale to them and explain it. My wife simply tells our kids what to do: join us at 7 p.m. for dinner, clean up your room, with little or no explanation. By saying less, she finds that she creates fewer opportunities for challenges and endless discussion. Conflict situations get resolved more quickly and efficiently. Life in our household becomes more harmonious. My wife might be on to something. As neurologist Joseph Parvizi told me, concision makes messages easier to receive, as it activates fewer processing systems in the brain. Uttering fewer words will usually allow us to connect better with audiences and keep their attention. In our age of rapidly shrinking attention spans, audiences have little patience for bloated messages. We must ask ourselves, is everything we're saying, every idea, sentence, or word, really necessary? Or might we be able to convey even relatively simple, accessible concepts more quickly and efficiently without sacrificing clarity and relevance? In fact, leveraging the context in which we're communicating often can help us reduce our word count even further. When we're strolling with a friend into a library or museum, we don't need to tell our friend to speak quietly. It's obvious. Likewise, when we're headed to a funeral, we don't need to tell others in our group to show respect and tone down what they are saying. The atmosphere itself will usually convey the social expectations. The cartoonist Hilary Price, creator of the award-winning daily single-panel comic strip Rhymes with Orange, relies on the context of the images she creates to tell entire stories using only a handful of words. Every object in her panels, a cloud, a bush, a piece of furniture, is carefully designed to help her convey her message. Every word counts, too. The thing you want to do, she says, is use the fewest number of words you can and let a picture tell the story. You never want to say apple if you could show an apple. As part of her creative process, Price starts with more words in a panel and winnows them down as she refines her work. She also tries to convey as little information as possible, allowing readers room to draw connections themselves. As she observes, a great deal of pleasure in reading a comic strip comes in piecing together the meaning, or as she puts it, going from not knowing to knowing. Of course, she can't give too little information. That would only confuse readers. The trick is to reach a sweet spot of concision and clarity. In her mind, she can accomplish that by conveying only 49% of the information, leaving it to readers to fill in the rest based on the context in which they encounter her messages. Often, she'll achieve that concision by depicting a scene just before an event happens, leaving it to readers to draw logical conclusions about what will soon transpire. What's funnier, she says, watching me throw a drink at you or seeing me as I'm just about to do that? The latter, of course, and there's no need to then show the actual throwing of the drink or the reactions of the characters. Afterward, the ancient Greeks held that brevity is the soul of wit, an antecedent to our own aphorism, less is more. In Price's world, brevity is the soul of humor and entertainment. The takeaway, leverage context and consider the least amount of information you would need to convey your meaning clearly. Then stick to that. We can also attack verbosity directly by becoming more aware of how we respond when put on the spot. New York Times editor Glenn Craman advises writers to read their work aloud to find opportunities for more concision. As speakers, we can do the opposite. If we're speaking in a room or on a Zoom and someone is recording it, we can go back after the fact and analyze a written transcript of what we said, or consult the recording itself, noticing patterns in our speech, repetition of sentences, presentation of excessive detail, and so on, that add unnecessary verbiage. We can also have a partner ask us questions, record our spontaneous responses, and analyze them afterward for patterns. Before we enter situations in which we anticipate speaking impromptu, we can remind ourselves not to repeat these patterns. And we can continue to watch recordings of ourselves periodically to check in on our progress. An even simpler way to self-assess is to review your text messages from the past week. Most of these likely constitute spontaneous communication on your part, albeit in written rather than spoken form. Were your responses longer or more numerous than necessary? Were you saying more than those with whom you were corresponding? What patterns of verbosity did you notice? Challenge yourself over the next week to write fewer and shorter but more meaningful texts, and notice how it impacts your relationships with others. It might also help to tackle what we can call brevity challenges. The next time you're preparing to enter a spontaneous speaking situation, think about your primary messages and see how it feels to convey them as a tweet, sticking to the original 140-character limit. Doing this regularly can enhance your ability to focus your message and keep it short. You might also practice writing haikus, poems composed of only 17 syllables. Or you might try your hand at writing a short story. Believe it or not, some people can write a complete story in only 6 words, or delivering a pichacucha presentation, a format in which you're limited to 20 slides and 20 seconds of discussion per slide. Try it. Take your first brevity challenge. Summarize this chapter in 25 words or less. Can you do it? Now try brevity challenges in other aspects of your life. A $1.5 trillion company in just 12 words as of late 2023, Google, now called Alphabet, is one of the world's most valuable companies, with a market value exceeding $1.2 trillion. It has numerous businesses, including in online search, cloud computing, consumer electronics, AI, and even quantum computing. It operates out of dozens of locations around the world. Yet despite the company's size and complexity, Google's leadership has been able to boil what the company does down to just 12 words. As Google's mission statement informs us, the company aims to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. This mission is a simple statement that most people can readily understand. But arriving at such a sharply focused phrasing was not so simple. Raymond Nosser helped to craft this mission statement during the early 2000s while serving as the company's director of communication. As he recalls, he and other colleagues met monthly for 3 hours at a time to crack exactly how to convey Google's business purpose. It was a tough challenge. They needed a phrase that not only conveyed what the company was about but was also concise, repeatable, and optimistic and came from a place of passion. We worked so long and hard on it, it became a labor of love, Nosser says. We revised and revised and revised until we were blue in the face. It was no fun at all. But when you love a company, you do it. Finally, after many months, they were able to arrive at a wording that pleased the firm's founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. The company formally adopted to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful as its mission. As of this writing in 2023, Google still presents this same formulation publicly on its website. In our spontaneous communication, achieving focus can be harder than it looks. You might come away from this chapter wondering how you'll ever do it. It's tough enough improving in the other areas covered in this book: managing anxiety, relinquishing perfectionism, reframing how we approach spontaneous communication, listening better to others, and lending structure to what we say. Now that we're working on all of that, how can we also work on 4 additional areas related to focus? Won't we overwhelm ourselves and risk losing focus in the very act of trying to find it as communicators? It's a valid question, and I have what I hope is an equally valid answer. Take it slow. Although improving along all 4 dimensions will help you take your focus to the max, you need not do it all at once. Work on one dimension of focus at a time. Just a bit of attention here can enhance your self-awareness in the moment, leading to much clearer, more powerful messages. Remember, there is no perfect when it comes to communication. Generally, and focus in particular, we can take each of the 4 dimensions of focus too far. If we're too goal-directed, we can become rigid, unable to respond to the shifting demands of a spontaneous situation. Think of the politician in a debate who just harps repetitively on their points without acknowledging questions others are asking. If we spend too much time tailoring our message for our audience, it risks becoming overly narrow, tailored only to them and utterly uninteresting to anyone else. If we push accessibility too far, it might seem as if we're dumbing down our messages and making them too simple. If we're too concise, we risk confusing our audiences. They don't have enough information or detail to understand what we're trying to say. Remaining mindful of the F word of communication and drawing our audience's attention to what matters most will dramatically improve the power of our messages. We want audiences to hear us. We want to create common ground with them. And it's up to us to make their job as easy, pain-free, and interesting as possible. The more we share our ideas, the more we listen and learn about our audiences, the better able we will be to focus our messages so that they powerfully resonate. Drill it. 1. Think about the last meeting you attended. Try to summarize it in 50 words, then 25 words, and then 12. What did you do to cut back the words? Did you focus on reducing jargon? On reducing complexity? How did you prioritize what you communicated? 2. Pick a topic about which you feel passionately, and jot down a few notes reflecting what you would say about this topic if someone gave you 2 or 3 minutes to speak. Imagine speaking before a group that is completely engaged with that topic. Then imagine speaking before a group to whom you are introducing this topic for the very first time. Consider how you might adjust your remarks to reflect the varying needs of these audiences. What more might you add in each case, and what might you subtract to keep each engaged and interested? 3. Think of a fairly complex task you perform in your daily life, such as putting a child to bed, shuffling cards, preparing your favorite dish, or negotiating a business arrangement. Think of how you might describe this task using a metaphor or analogy. For example, putting a child to bed is like. Now practice describing this task in front of a mirror or camera. Does the metaphor or analogy allow you to describe the task more simply and in fewer words.